Hi guys, I'm Demon Killer, and in this video we are going to walk through how we can dual boot Windows 10 and Ubuntu 20.04 LTS on a single hard disk. So just a little disclaimer before we begin. So if you are planning to experiment beyond the scope of this video, please do not blame me if anything goes wrong. However, if you plan to follow everything step by step as what I'm showing in this video, definitely by the end of this video you will have Windows 10 and Ubuntu 20.04 LTS installed on your single hard disk drive without any data loss. So let's get into it. Okay guys, so this is going to be a actual hardware installation on this particular hard disk here which you are seeing. I've prepared a little setup here, so that's where we are going to work on. And for the sake of this video, we will be doing this dual boot installation on a Seagate 500 GB hard disk drive. So it's 500 on the packaging, 465 usable. So let's get into it. This already has Windows 10 installed. So let's connect it to the SATA cable here and boot Windows. Okay, so I have connected the SATA cable as well as the power cable to the hard disk drive, and let's power on the machine. So while this boots up, I want to tell you that I am doing this on a desktop. However, you can always do this on a laptop as well. So I'll meet you once Windows boots up. Alright, so once we are booted up inside Windows, we want to do a couple of things before we begin with the actual Ubuntu installation. So the first thing I want to tell you is that this is a fresh copy of Windows, so yours might look a bit different because you might already be using Windows for a long time. So that the reason why I'm telling you this is because if you plan to do anything beyond the scope of this video, please go ahead and back up your data. Now this is a fresh install like I told you, so I don't have anything here, but if you guys might have a lot of important data stored in your drive. So if you plan to experiment beyond the scope of this video, please go ahead and back up your data. However, if you follow what I'm doing in this video step by step, you won't lose any data. This procedure is not going to affect your C and D drives. So for example, if I show you, I have prepared a text file here just to show you that your data won't be affected. So if you are following what I'm doing step by step, then you don't really have to worry. I do, however, recommend to go ahead and back up if you have the means to do so. However, that is not really important. But if you are planning to experiment beyond the scope of this video, then please go ahead and back up your data, because if anything goes wrong, I won't be responsible for it. Alright, so once we have that sorted, what we want to do is open our favorite web browser, and I'm going to open Edge, which is obviously not my favorite web browser, but since this is a fresh install, that is what I have. And we are going to install Ubuntu 20.04 like you have seen in the title. So search for that, and the first link is what you want to click on, and you want to click on this. And then depending on your browser, so on Edge it comes down somewhere here, so you can click on save. Now I'm going to click on cancel because I already have it downloaded. On Chrome, the download should start automatically, and on Firefox a pop-up window should appear. You have to click OK, and the progress will be mapped somewhere on the top right. So once you have downloaded your image, it should look something like this. And if it doesn't look something like this, that is probably because you have WinRAR installed. So WinRAR looks something like this. So if you have WinRAR installed, this is what you will see over here instead of this disk. Alright, so once you have Ubuntu installed, now many of you will think that this is for AMD CPUs and not for Intel. So that is not the case. Whether you have Intel CPUs or AMD CPUs, if you are running a 64-bit CPU, then this is what you want to click on. Now the reason for that is obviously because AMD were the one who got 64-bit into the market. They were the one who invented it. Maybe we can put it like that. But yeah, so what do you do if you don't have a 64-bit CPU? You run a 32-bit CPU. So to the best of my knowledge, Canonical, who are the developers of Ubuntu, they have dropped support for 32-bit disk images. So the best thing you can do in this case is get started with Ubuntu 16.04 LTS. It's an older version of Ubuntu, but they still support the 32-bit disk images. So you can just click on that and they'll download the same way Ubuntu 20.04 did. And the procedure from now onwards for both of these are going to be same. I'm going to focus on Ubuntu 20 because that is the whole purpose why we are doing this video. However, for 32-bit users, you might not find the official 32-bit image, because they might have dropped it. I'm not really sure. If anybody can confirm, that will be very good. But yeah, most of you who have 64-bit computers can just go ahead with this 64-bit disk image. Now you can also go ahead with the links here. There are torrent links and stuff like that, but this is the best thing to get started with. That's the most easiest. Now what we want to do is also install a utility by which we can make bootable USBs. So we are going to need a USB device, and for that we need an application called there are many applications like Balena, Etcher, but Rufus works best on Windows, at least for me. So you can just search for Rufus, and the first link is what you want to click on. So come down here and download the latest version of Rufus, which at the point of recording this video is version 3.12. In coming months you will have 3.13, 3.14, but the point is download the latest version. So click on that and you can save it as per your browser. So it should appear in your downloads folder like this, and we can install it by just double clicking it the normal way. Click on yes, and you should have Rufus installed, and it asks, do you want to allow Rufus to check for application updates online? So you just click on no, and this is Rufus. This is how it looks like, and we will have work on this later. So for the time being, let's come back to our browser, and we need to install another application, which is a BCD registry editor. So we can edit our BCD using the BCD edit command inside our command prompt. But what I want to show you is the easiest way to do this. So for that we will be using EasyBCD, which is very easy to use. So click on the first link once you have searched. This is a paid software. However, you can use the non-commercial version, which is for personal use. So you can register and then type in your name and email and just click on download. I already have downloaded it. So you need to install it. Double click on it, click on yes, and then click on next. I agree, next, install, and EasyBCD will install, and it looks something like this. And we are going to need this software, EasyBCD software, once we have installed Ubuntu on our computer. So EasyBCD is finished installing. It looks something like this. Now let's go ahead and insert our USB device, and we can close all of this. And we need Rufus right now, right? So you want to insert your USB device, which I'm going to insert right now, and you should get a nice sound, ting ding ding. And then as you can see, I have USB device connected here. Now we want to select our disk image. So disk image is in the downloads folder, as you know, because we have downloaded it here. So select that, and it says Ubuntu 20.04 LTS. This installation is going to be a legacy BIOS installation, so keep it like that and hit on start. And this says that this needs to basically download certain files from the internet, so you need to click on yes, and it will download 2 files. Now what you want to do is write an ISO image, click on OK, and then click on OK again. It's basically saying all data on the USB device is going to be wiped off. So if you have any data on the USB device, please back that up again. So I've not clicked on OK, so hit on OK. So now it's going to delete some partitions, and this process takes time depending on your processing power of your CPU. But once this is done, I'll see you. Alright, so as you can see, it's done, and we can just click on close, and our USB device is now a flash drive. It's a bootable USB, and we can keep it plugged in, but for some reasons, if it doesn't work later, I'll tell you what you can do is basically just remove the USB and plug it back in. Right now we are going to leave it plugged in, and the last thing we want to do here is right click on the Windows button, on the Windows icon here, which is on the bottom left, and then come here to disk management, and this window should pop up. It will give you basic information about your disks. So disk 1 is your USB device, so we already have Ubuntu on it, and disk 0 usually is your internal hard disk drive. So in this case I connected the 500 gig hard disk drive, which was 500 on the packaging, and 465 is usable. I've allocated around 265 for C and 200 gig for D. So now what I want to do is allocate some space for your Linux installation. So you guys might have some files stored in your D drive. So you want to make sure that you have certain amount of space left in your D drive which you can use for Ubuntu. So what you want to do is right click on this area here, and you want to do come down to shrink. And for this video I will shrink about 100 gigs of space. So you can shrink any amount of space depending on how much space you have left, the size of your hard disk. So if you have a 1 terabyte hard disk, you might have more space to use. However, if you have a 500 gig hard drive, you might use maybe 100 gig or 200 gig depending on how much space you have left. So I'll be using 100 gig just for demonstrational purposes. So 100 gigs in MB, we have to enter the value here in megabytes. So in MB it's 1024 into 100, so it's 102400. So any amount of space you want to enter here, just multiply it with 1024. So if you are you want, for example, 200 gigs of space, so what you want to do is 200 into 1024, and that is 204800. If you want 10 gigs, it's going to be 10240. So I hope you get the point. Whatever space you want to do, you want to allocate, you want to multiply that number by 1024 so that you can convert your gigs into megabits. Okay, so in this video I'll be going ahead with 100 gigs. So I'm going to click on shrink, and around exactly 100 gigs, as you can see, space has been unallocated, and that's where we're going to install our Ubuntu. So now I'm going to close everything, and we want to come down and shut down our computer. All right, and once we shut down, I'll see you once the computer is shut down. Alright, so now that we have shut down our computer, you want to insert the bootable Ubuntu USB if you had removed it. So insert that in and then power on the machine right now, and then press one of the function keys once your screen pops up, and you should enter your boot menu. So on your screen what you are seeing is the boot menu key, or the function key combinations via which you can enter the boot menu of your motherboard. So what you want to do is basically go to your motherboard manufacturer's website. So on desktops, the famous motherboard manufacturers are Gigabyte, MSI, and Asus, whose keys you are seeing on the screen. And for desktop, for laptop, you should go ahead to the site of your laptop manufacturer. So for example, for Dell or HP, Acer or Lenovo, these are the particular function keys which you can press to access the boot menu. So once you have accessed your boot menu, you want to enter the manufacturer of your USB device. So in my case it's SanDisk. The first one is of course our 500 gig hard disk drive, and the last option is our BIOS settings. So we want to select the USB device and hit enter. And once you hit enter, you should see something like this. And then the screen should go blank, and then you should see the Ubuntu logo, and the USB device will check the disk. And once this is complete, we should be greeted by the installer screen. Once you reach this screen, what you want to do is come and click on install Ubuntu. So once you have select on install Ubuntu, you will be greeted by this screen wherein we have to select our language. So the language I'm going to select is English, and you want to hit on continue. Then you want to select your keyboard layout. So I'll be using the English International United States keyboard. So hit on continue, and then you want to select normal installation, and then you can also tick install third-party software for graphics and Wi-Fi hardware. So what this does is basically install all your proprietary drivers. So you can click on that if you have drivers. So I'll just click on that. Okay. Once you do that, you will be greeted by three options, which is install Ubuntu alongside Windows 10, which is what we want to do, erase disk, and install Ubuntu, which is something that we don't want to do, and then something else. So install Ubuntu alongside Windows 10. Now what we do is, if we click on install now, we will be given a option to partition our disk. So I'll just show you what it does. Is basically it creates a partition as per its own wish. So we are not given the freedom to set our partitions manually. So that's not what we want to do. So I'm just going to go back, and what we want to do is click on something else. So once the cursor is back, I'm going to click on something else, and now I'm going to click on continue. So once we click on continue, our partition table has loaded. So /dev/sda is the name of our drive, and that is where we want to do in the whole installation. So SDA1 and SDA2 contains the Windows partitions. So SDA1 has your C drive, and SDA2 is your D drive, which has nothing in it basically. So we have 100 gig free space that we created inside disk management utility of Windows, and we are going to use this to create our partitions. So what we want to do right now is click on plus, and we want to create 4 partitions here. So the 4 partitions are going to be your boot partition, your root partition, swap, and home. So I'll explain what these partitions are once we do the installation. So your boot partition is a partition where you want to install your bootloader. So for Ubuntu, your default bootloader is grub. Now you can change that, but out of the box grub comes installed. So that requires somewhere around 300 to 400 MBs of space. So I'll just give some something in the middle, so 350. The type of partition can be primary, but we are going to keep it logical, and we are going to keep it at the beginning of this space, and we are going to use this as ext4 file system, and we want to mount it as boot. So click on boot and hit on OK. So once you do that, your boot partition is ready, and once that is ready, you want to select SDA5 as the boot partition, as the device for bootloader installation. So in all the cases it's going to be SDA5, okay, since we are creating a logical partition. Now what we want to do is come back to the free space, click on the free space again and hit on the plus sign here, and now we want to create our root partition. So root partition is somewhat similar to your C drive. It is basically where you have all your system files and all your config files of Linux, of Ubuntu, right? So that can be around 20 to 30 gigs. So I'm going to go with 20 gigs for now. And the reason for that is Linux software usually are very small as compared to Windows software. For example, if you can compare Visual Studio Code, so if you see on Google, the file size of Visual Studio Code on Windows is way larger than the file size of Visual Studio Code on Linux. So hence what we can conclude is that the root partition can be smaller. It doesn't really matter, so I'm just going to go with 20 gigs, which is 20480, that is 1024 into 20. This is again going to be a logical partition and the beginning of this space, and again it's going to be used as it's going to be formatted as ext4 file system, and then we want to mount it on as root. So just the slash is your root. Click on OK, and your root partition should be set. The next partition that we want to create is a swap partition. Now what the swap partition is, it functions pretty similar to your RAM, so you can consider it as an extended RAM. It's not your physical RAM, but what happens is when you run out of RAM in certain applications, then you can use your swap area to suffice for that. So swap area is you should always set your swap area equivalent to the RAM. So in this case, in this machine, I have 8 gigs of RAM, so I'm going to keep the swap area as 8 gigs. So come to free space, hit on plus, and 8 gigs is 1024 into 8, and that is 8192 if my math is right. It's again going to be a logical partition, but this time we want to keep it at the end of the space, which means it's going to appear somewhere at the end. So this whole graph thing, it's a graph, and what we are seeing here is all the partitions and how much disk space they take. So our root partition is somewhere here. It is a blue color partition, it's not really visible, and the root partition is this green one, and we are going to create our swap partition. So this is going to be at the end of the space, and we are going to use this as swap area. So let me just get this a little bit up. So this is going to be your swap area. So once you do that, click on OK, and you'll notice it comes at the end of the space, which is at the end of the disk. And another, so you saw it's at the end of the disk, and it also appears below the free space this time, right? So Now we have around 70 gigs, I guess. Yeah, around 70 gigs of space left. 72 gigs of space left basically, because we have 20 for the root and 8 for swap, and negligible 350 for boot. So around 72 gigs space left, which we can use as our home partition. So home partition is pretty similar to your D drive, wherein you store your files, videos, music, photos, all that stuff. So your documents, right? So we want to use, we need some space for that. So 72 gigs is fine. So we use all of this. So click on plus. We're going to use all of this. It's going to be logical. It's going to be end of the space, which means this white area is going to be occupied by this, and then the mount point is going to be /home. So click on OK, and we should have the partition set. So we created 4 partitions, which are the boot partition, which has our bootloader, and we have set the device for bootloader as SDA5, which is the boot partition. It also says /boot here. So this the SDA5 is your boot partition. SDA6 on the other hand is your root partition, where you will store your system files, config files, and all that stuff, similar to your C drive in Windows. And your home partition is your D drive in Windows, where you are going to store all your folders, day-to-day folders, documents, images, music, all that stuff. And swap area is similar to your it is basically your extended RAM. So 4 partitions, SDA 5, 6, 7 and 8, right? So we have selected the device for bootloader installation as the boot partition, and we want to make sure of what this is, because we are going to need this while we are setting up the BCD, while we are editing the BCD in Windows. So once we have ensured this, click on install now, and it's going to reconfirm that whether you want to do this. So SDA 5, 6, 8 are as ext4 and 7 is swap. Alright, so click on continue, and you can select your time zone. So I'm in India, so just click on continue, and then you can type in your credentials. And once you have typed in your credentials, you can just go ahead and hit on continue, sit back and relax. So the Ubuntu installer will install Ubuntu for you, and all this procedure that we talked about is for all the versions of Ubuntu, whether we are talking about Ubuntu 16.04, 18.04 or 20.04. In fact, the same installer is also present in Linux Mint, not the one which is the Debian edition, but the Linux Mint, which is derived from Ubuntu. So this procedure also applies on Linux Mint as well. So this is how we are going to install Linux on our hard disk, and the installation is not quite over yet. Once it's installed, we have to boot back into Windows and then do some settings there before we can finally call it a video. So let's sit back, relax and wait for this to finish. Alright, so you should get something similar like this, what I have on the screen. Installation has finished. You can continue testing Ubuntu now. The reason for that is I clicked on try Ubuntu, but basically what you should get is restart now, and that is what you want to click on. So once you restart, you should get a message like this: please remove the installation medium, and then press enter. So remove your USB device from your computer and hit an enter, and really funny thing should happen, and that is we boot back into Windows. So you'll see that we boot back into Windows, and that's really funny. So is all the efforts wasted? So it's not. So what we want to do is log back into Windows and then edit the BCD registry. So we are going to use the easy BCD tool to edit the BCD registry, and once I log back into Windows, I'll get back to you. So now that you have logged in back into Windows, what you want to do is open ECBCD, which we had downloaded, and click on yes when it says do you want this application to make changes to your computer. And what you see is something like this. I'll just maximize this, and here is the overview of what our BCD registry looks like, basically how our bootloader will function. So we have the Windows bootloader set as default, so that's why we booted back into Windows. So what we want to do is edit the boot menu, and again here you see that Windows 10 is the only operating system which is being detected right now. The only bootloader which is detected right now is the Windows bootloader. So we want to make sure the Linux bootloader is also detected. So what we want to do is come to add new entry, and then we want to come to linux/bsd, and then in the type we want to select grub2, which is the second option, and then we are going to rename this with Ubuntu 20.04. You can name it anything, but yeah, since we have Ubuntu 20.04 LTS, that's what I'm going to name it. And in the drive we want to locate our boot partition that we had made, the 350 MB boot partition. That's what we want to allocate here, assign here basically. So as you can see, all these partitions are in GBs, but the only partition in MBs here is your partition 3, which is 333 MB here. So we created the partition of 350 MB, but right now the only one which is visible in MBs is this one. So that is a boot partition. That's how you locate your boot partition, and everything else is your other partitions, root or home and all that stuff. So this is your boot partition, and once you have done all this, you can just come and click on plus, and in your edit boot menu option you should see Ubuntu 20.04 LTS. So technically this is done. Once we reboot our system, we should get an option to choose between Windows and Ubuntu, but the problem is this uses Metro bootloader. Now Metro bootloader is a nice bootloader, it's amazing, but it is a bit resource holic. So basically this is slow on older systems. So in fact on 8th generation CPUs it is slow. So I don't prefer Metro bootloader. So what I'll do is uncheck this, and I'll also reduce the time from 30 seconds to 10 seconds, because I don't need that much time to choose between both the operating systems. And also I'm going to make Ubuntu as the default operating system. So basically what will happen is, once you hit your power button on, if you don't do anything for the 10 seconds that we have assigned here, it's just going to directly boot into Ubuntu. And obviously before 10 seconds, if you select Windows, it's going to boot into Windows, but if you don't do anything, it's going to boot into Ubuntu. So one last thing that we want to do is, we have set Ubuntu as the primary OS right now, but since Windows 10 is above it, we still get a bit of Metro bootloader. So basically you'll get Metro with Ubuntu at the top. So basically what happens is, when you turn on your power button, you get Ubuntu directly booted via Metro, and that's something that we don't want. Even if we have unchecked this, because Windows is on the top, the Metro bootloader will boot up again. So what we want to do is select Ubuntu and then move this up. So once this is moved up, we won't get Metro bootloader, we will get another bootloader which is not so cool, but yeah, it does the job. So we will now save the settings here, and now we can reboot our system, and I'll show you how it looks like. So now we will have an option to choose, as you can see, between Ubuntu 20.04 LTS and Windows 10, and here is the countdown timer. So I'm just going to move the arrow keys so that the timer shuts off, but every time you turn on your power button, you should see something like this. So once you press enter while Ubuntu is checked, you will be shifted to grub, and you can boot Ubuntu from there. And if you do this, the Windows boot, if you select Windows and press enter, your Windows bootloader automatically starts booting Windows. So this is how we install, this is how we basically dual boot Windows 10 and Ubuntu 20.04 LTS on a single hard disk in a computer or a laptop, or desktop or laptop. So if you like the video, please do subscribe, and thank you so much for watching. Please do recommend what else you want to dual boot or triple boot. I already have a triple boot video, by the way. It's I'll link it in the description. It's Windows, Manjaro and Ubuntu. So tell me what all you want to dual boot or triple boot, so I'll do that. Thank you so much for watching. Have a nice day.